It's easy to look at someone who's made it and assume they were always destined for greatness, but the truth is far messier and far more inspiring. You see, I wasn't born with applause in the background or open doors waiting for me. In fact, many of those doors were slammed shut before I even got the chance to knock. I still remember the early days, full of rejection and uncertainty. There were times when people looked at me and decided I just didn't fit the mold. Too quiet, too unpolished, too unlikely, and when people label you like that, it sticks. It follows you into every room, every conversation, every opportunity you try to reach for. I was told no so many times that the words started to sound like my own name. But something inside me refused to give in. Even when the odds weren't just against me, they were practically laughing in my face. I kept going, not because I was sure I'd make it, but because I was sure I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try. Every rejection became fuel. Every closed door was a challenge to find a window. I didn't wait for confidence to show up. I built it through repetition, sweat, and sheer stubbornness. There were moments when I'd show up knowing I didn't have the right look, the right voice, the right background. I knew I'd be judged the second I stepped into a room, and you know what? I was. People made decisions about me before I said a single word, but I spoke anyway. I kept showing up. I kept saying yes when it was easier to walk away. And eventually, quietly, slowly, things began to shift. One opportunity led to another, and not because someone handed it to me. It was because I had trained myself to be ready for that moment. I had rehearsed when no one was watching. I had studied when others gave up. I had stayed in the room when it would have been more comfortable to leave. I didn't just want success. I was determined to earn it. It wasn't a straight line. There were failures. Big ones that made me question everything. But here's what I learned. Rejection is not the end of the road. It's just a test. It asks, how bad do you really want this? And if you can answer that question with action, by standing back up every time, you find out just how far resilience can take you. Looking back, I realize I wasn't supposed to fit the mold. I was meant to break it. And that's something I carry with me even now. The understanding that the beginning of your story doesn't define the ending. You can start from the bottom, overlooked and underestimated, and still rise, all because you decided to show up with determination again and again. You don't need to be chosen first to make an impact. You don't need the perfect path. You just need one thing that can't be taught, the refusal to give up. Determination makes up for what you lack in experience, in talent, even in support. And when you pair that with consistency, you become unstoppable, not because you never fall, but because you never stay down. So yes, I rose from rejection, but it wasn't luck, it was effort. It was long nights, quiet sacrifices, and a belief that I had something worth fighting for, even if no one else could see it yet. And if you're sitting there wondering if your moment will ever come, let me tell you it can. But only if you're willing to chase it long after the world tells you to quit. The journey from rejection to recognition is not paved for you. You lay each stone yourself. People often talk about chasing dreams like it's a luxury, like it's something you do when everything in life is already going right. But for me, the dream didn't come wrapped in comfort or convenience. It was born in struggle, not just hardship, but the kind of struggle that shapes you before you even understand what it means to want something more. I didn't grow up in a world where everything was handed to me. In fact, most of the time, it felt like everything was being held just out of reach. There were days I wondered if dreaming was even allowed for someone like me. When your focus is survival, dreams feel like distractions. But something inside wouldn't let me give up on the idea that life could be different. There was no roadmap, no mentor, no safety net. I had to teach myself how to believe in something bigger when everything around me said, "Stay small." I remember watching other people with all the advantages, access, encouragement, even just time to think freely, and I used to ask myself, why not me? Not out of jealousy, but out of genuine and hunger to prove that struggle doesn't disqualify you from building something extraordinary. You see, when you grow up with less, you learn to make more out of everything, more from rejection, more from discomfort, more from silence. Every obstacle I faced became a lesson. Every missed opportunity was a reminder to stay ready for the next one. I didn't wish for an easier path. I knew I wouldn't get one. Instead, I chose to be relentless with the path I had. People often mistake struggle for weakness. They think if you're struggling, it's because you're not good enough. But I believe the opposite. Struggle is a signal. It means you're pushing against something. It means you're moving. And every time I hit a wall, I reminded myself that walls are only permanent if you stop trying to climb them. I didn't come from privilege, but I came with purpose. And that purpose was born from watching people. I loved work too hard for too little. It was born from knowing what it means to be overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed before even opening your mouth. And somehow, in the middle of all that noise, I kept hearing this quiet voice saying, "Don't stop. You were made for more." There were nights I would lie awake questioning everything, wondering if this dream I had was just some distant fantasy meant for someone else. But those nights were also when I realized something powerful. If I could keep believing in that dream even in the dark, then it must be real. It had weight. It had fire. It didn't need anyone else's permission to exist. I used to think success was about talent or timing, but now I know it's about endurance. It's about how many times you're willing to keep showing up, especially when it feels like no one sees you, especially when the silence gets loud, especially when the struggle doesn't let up. What I've learned is that coming from struggle doesn't make your dream any smaller. It makes it sharper. It forces you to fight for it in ways that people who had it easy will never understand. And when you finally break through, it means more, not because you made it to the top, but because you know exactly what it took to get there. That dream of mine, it wasn't born in comfort. It didn't grow in rooms filled with praise. It came to life through grit, through pain, and through the unshakable belief that where I started didn't have to decide where I'd finish. I didn't have a head start, but I had the will to keep going, and that was enough. There was a time when speaking up felt like the hardest thing in the world, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I believed no one wanted to hear it. When the world doubts every word you speak, your ideas, your voice, your presence, it becomes easy to doubt yourself too. And once that doubt creeps in, silence starts to feel safer than expression. I wasn't always this confident. In fact, I used to speak with hesitation, afraid that every word might expose how unsure I felt inside. I would rehearse conversations in my head, plan exactly what I was going to say, only to say nothing at all when the moment came. Not because I lacked thoughts, but because I feared being misunderstood, or worse, ignored. It didn't help that others around me were quick to assume I had nothing of value to contribute. I could see it in their faces, hear it in their tone, feel it in the way they looked past me like I was invisible. Every interaction was a quiet battle between my need to speak and their assumption that I shouldn't. And after a while, you start to internalize those voices. You begin to believe that maybe they're right. Maybe silence is the better choice, but deep down something pushed back. Something quiet but persistent that kept telling me I had the right to take up space, to be heard, to speak even if my voice trembled. And that became my starting point, not confidence, not boldness, just the decision to try, to open my mouth and trust that my words mattered, even if no one else believed it yet. The first time I really spoke up, I was terrified. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I was certain no one would listen. But I did it anyway. I put my fear aside, even if just for a moment, and I let the truth come out. And to my surprise, someone listened. Not everyone, but someone, and that was enough to change everything. Speaking up didn't suddenly make the world listen. It didn't erase the doubt or silence the critics, but it gave me something far more powerful. It gave me agency. It gave me the ability to shape my reality instead of shrinking inside it. Every word I said became an act of resistance, a way of reclaiming my story from the hands of those who tried to write it for me. There were still moments I stumbled, still times when my voice cracked or my message missed the mark, but I kept going because I realized that speaking with uncertainty was still better than staying silent out of fear. I learned that clarity comes through use, not through waiting for the perfect moment. You don't find your voice by hiding it. You find it by using it. Eventually, I stopped needing everyone to believe in me. I just needed to believe in myself, and once I did that, it didn't matter if the room fell quiet or someone rolled their eyes. I had already won the hardest battle, overcoming the belief that I had nothing to say. The truth is, people will doubt you no matter how well you speak, no matter how prepared you are. That's just the world sometimes, but you can't let their doubt become your silence. You can't let their small vision shrink your voice. You have to speak, especially when it feels like no one wants to hear you, because that's when it matters most. Now, when I talk, I do it not just for myself, but for anyone who's ever been made to feel like their voice didn't count. I know that pain. I've lived it, but I also know the freedom that comes from pushing past it, from standing your ground, raising your voice and saying, I'm here, I matter, and I have something to say. Because once you learn to speak up in a world that doubts every word, you don't just find your voice. You build a life that finally listens. Failure has a way of introducing itself with authority. It doesn't knock gently. It crashes through the door, uninvited and unapologetic. And when it shows up, it can feel like everything you've worked for suddenly collapses under your feet. I've felt that collapse more than once. I've faced the kind of failures that make you question not just your choices, but your worth. But here's the truth that took me a long time to understand. Failure doesn't mean the end unless you let it. It can feel like a dead end, yes, but it's also a fork in the road, a choice point. You can let it block you, bury you, convince you that your path is over. Or you can look at it differently. You can decide to stand back up and take another step, not away from the failure, but through it. My first real failure hit hard. I thought I had everything lined up perfectly. I worked, I prepared, I believed, and still it didn't happen. I fell short publicly and painfully, and when it was over, I wasn't just disappointed. I was embarrassed. I felt like I had let everyone down, including myself. But when I was sitting in that quiet moment after the fall, I asked myself a question that changed everything. What if this isn't happening to me, but for me? That question turned the light back on. Because failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. It teaches you what your limits are, and more importantly, how to push past them. It shows you where you need to grow, where your blind spots are, where you've gotten too comfortable. Failure brings pain, yes, but it also brings clarity. Each time I failed after that, and there were many, I tried to meet it with curiosity instead of shame. What was this moment trying to teach me? What could I take from this that I couldn't have learned any other way? That shift in mindset made the biggest difference. Instead of feeling stuck, I started to see every setback as another step forward. As long as I kept moving, there were moments when the failures stacked up. one after another, until it felt like I was sinking. But I kept reminding myself, stones can either trip you or you can use them to build something. I chose to build. I took those failures and stacked them beneath my feet, turning each one into a step higher than where I stood before. That's not to say it was easy. Growth never is. It means swallowing pride. It means trying again when the outcome might be exactly the same. It means walking back into a room that once saw you fall and saying, "I'm still here." But the more you do it, the stronger you get. The fear starts to fade, not because it disappears, but because your belief becomes louder than your doubt. The world loves to celebrate success, but it rarely shows the road that led there, the rejections, the missteps, the almosts. People think those moments discredit you. I believe they qualify you, because if you failed and gotten back up, you know something most people don't: how to endure, how to adapt. How to keep going when there's no guarantee of reward, only the hope that something greater lies ahead if you just stay in the fight. And when success finally came, and it did, it wasn't sweet because it was easy. It was sweet because I knew how much I had overcome to get there. I could look back and trace every single failure like markers on a map, leading me, shaping me, toughening me for what was next. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: don't fear the fall. Fear standing still. Fear never risking enough to fail in the first place. Because failure isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. It's the thing that shows you what you're made of. So when the world tells you you've failed, smile quietly to yourself. Because they don't realize you're just getting started. There was a time when I lived in the background, not because I didn't want more, but because I didn't believe I deserved it. I stayed quiet, watched from the edges, and convinced myself that some people were just meant to shine while others stayed in the shadows. That's what I told myself, until something deeper began to speak louder than my fear. You don't just wake up in the spotlight one day. You build your way there, often silently, and often without anyone clapping for you along the way. I know what it's like to speak a little too softly in rooms that already feel too big. I know the weight of being overlooked, of wanting to contribute but not knowing how to break through the noise. But more than anything, I know what it's like to want something more, not out of ego, but out of a quiet belief that you were meant for something beyond surviving. For a long time, belief was all I had. It was fragile at first, just a flicker in the dark, but it was there, and every time I silenced myself, every time I shrank to make others comfortable, that belief tugged at me. It asked, what if you're wrong about who you are? That question became impossible to ignore. I started small, not with grand moves, but with honest ones. I raised my hand when it was shaking. I spoke when my voice felt too soft. I took chances knowing they might not go anywhere, but hoping they might. Each time I did, something changed, not always in the world around me, but always inside me. I stopped needing to be ready. I started needing to be real. People assume the spotlight is something you chase, but for me, it was something I walked toward step by step, without knowing if it would ever actually find me. I didn't do it for attention. I did it to prove to myself that I could be more than the version of me that played small to feel safe. What made the journey possible wasn't talent or timing. It was belief, belief that my voice had weight, belief that my story mattered, belief that I could grow even when I had no proof yet. That kind of belief isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet. It shows up when you're alone, when no one is watching, when you feel like giving up but decide to keep going anyway. There were moments I wanted to go back to silence. When things didn't go as planned, when criticism came louder than support, when the spotlight felt more exposing than empowering. But then I'd remember how far I'd come. I'd remember the person who once thought they had nothing to offer, and how wrong they were. The spotlight isn't just about being seen by others. It's about finally seeing yourself clearly. It's about standing in a space you used to be afraid of and realizing you belong there, not because someone handed it to you, but because you earned every inch of that light. Because you refused to let the past define your voice, because you chose to believe in who you were becoming. Every time I look back on the quiet version of myself, I don't feel shame. I feel gratitude. Because that silence taught me to listen. It taught me patience, humility, awareness, but it also taught me that staying silent out of fear is not the same as being humble. You can be quiet and still carry a fire inside you. And when that fire is ready, it becomes your power. Not in noise, but in presence. I didn't wait to be chosen. I chose myself. I didn't wait for perfect words. I started with honest ones. And step by step, I moved from the shadows into the light, not because I was fearless, but because I had finally decided that belief was stronger than fear. The journey from silence to spotlight doesn't require permission. It requires faith. I've seen talent, real, raw, undeniable talent. I've stood next to people who had natural gifts that could take your breath away. They could walk into a room and light it up with ease, speak without rehearsing, perform without breaking a sweat. And for a long time, I believed that talent was the ultimate key, that if you didn't have it, you were already behind. That belief almost stopped me before I even started, because I wasn't the most naturally gifted. Things didn't come easily. I wasn't the fastest learner, the smoothest talker, or the person who caught on in a single try. I had to work twice as hard just to stay in the room. But here's what I discovered. Talent is only potential. Discipline is what turns it into something real. I started to notice something interesting. The people with the most talent, sometimes they hesitated. They relied on what they already had and stopped pushing. They waited for the perfect moment, assumed their gift would carry them through, and sometimes it did, but not always, because talent might open the first door. But it's discipline that keeps you walking when the hallway gets long. Discipline doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't wait for motivation to show up. It shows up even when you're tired, even when no one's watching, even when the results are slow and invisible. I leaned into that. I made peace with the grind. I woke up early, stayed late, failed publicly, and kept showing up anyway. Not because it was easy, but because I knew I didn't have the luxury of relying on talent alone. People ask me what made the difference, how I kept going when others drifted away, and honestly, it wasn't some special formula. It was repetition. It was getting back up when I fell. It was doing the work even when the outcome was uncertain. Discipline taught me that success isn't about flashes of brilliance. It's about consistency. It's about who keeps showing up long after the excitement fades. I remember seeing people with more skill than me walk away when things got hard. I don't say that with judgment. I get it. It's tough when things don't come naturally anymore, but I wasn't depending on ease. I was depending on effort. I had built my path on persistence, not performance. So when things got hard, I didn't stop. I dug deeper, and the deeper I went, the more I grew, not just in ability, but in resilience. Discipline reshaped how I saw everything. It taught me to respect the process, to find pride in the small steps, to value effort over outcome. There's a kind of quiet power that comes from knowing you can trust yourself to do the work. It builds a confidence no amount of talent alone can give you. Eventually, I started passing people who had once been miles ahead of me. Not because I was better, but because I had become more consistent. While they waited for inspiration, I was moving. While they hesitated, I was building. Discipline doesn't just close the gap, it creates momentum. And momentum is powerful. It turns average into extraordinary when applied long enough. I'm not here to say talent doesn't matter. It absolutely does. But talent without discipline is like a car without gas, impressive on the outside, but not going anywhere. What matters more is what you do with what you have, and no matter where you start, discipline gives you a way forward. So if you're sitting there thinking you're not the most talented, I get it. I've been there. But don't let that stop you. You don't need to be gifted. You need to be committed, because the truth is, talent might give you the first word, but discipline will help you finish the story. Thank you for walking with me through this journey, one built not on ease, but on effort. Let this be your reminder that belief, discipline, and resilience will always speak louder than doubt. Your story is still being written, so keep showing up and keep turning your struggle into strength.